everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of No Bullshit Talks. I am so pleased to be joined here today by Terry Tucker, who is the author of Sustainable Excellence. So welcome.
Thanks, Sabrina. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
So Sustainable Excellence is your book, and tell everyone who's listening what it's about and what inspired you to write it.
So the book was really born out of two conversations that I had. One was I used to be a high school girls basketball coach. And one of my former players had moved to the area in the United States where my wife and I live with her fiance. And one night, the four of us had dinner together. And after dinner, I remember saying to her, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she kind of looked at me and she's like, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth and then living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man in college reach out to me on social media and ask me what I thought were the most important things he should learn to not just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others kind of stuff. Not that that's not important. It is incredibly important, but I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time and I was writing notes, and I had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so then I sent them to him and I kind of stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So I've been battling cancer for the last 10 years, and I had my leg amputated in April of 2020, and I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs in June of 2020. So during that 3-month period or so where I was healing, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath the principles. And that's how Sustainable Excellence, the 10 principles to leading your uncommon and extraordinary life, came to be.
That's incredible. And I just admire such strength in people like yourself who, you're battling one of the most difficult things ever. You're trying to deal with cancer. You've had your leg amputated. And instead of wallowing in self-pity, you decide to write a book and try to inspire other people. That's incredible. So how do you find the mental strength to do something like that while you're going through such a traumatic thing? Did you not have, you must have had some sort of overwhelming emotion that most people feel first. Talk me through that journey of how you went from, the shock and, the distress and all that stuff, and how it led to finding that, because I think that's what a lot of people would love to do, that to be able to handle it in such a positive way that you're doing. You've taken a traumatic event and turned it into something inspirational for all. I mean, not a lot of people can do that. So walk me through how you've managed to turn your life around like that.
I guess I would disagree with you. I think everybody can do it. Now, it's a matter of, do you want to do it? And do you have the mindset to do it? I guess to back up a little bit, I have a rare form of melanoma. And at the time I was diagnosed, as I mentioned, I was a girls' high school basketball coach, and I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally, he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen this form of cancer. You have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And because my cancer was so incredibly rare, he recommended that I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center, which here in the United States is probably the premier cancer hospital. And so I did. And that started the odyssey of surgeries and drugs and all kinds of things like that. And right now, I'm on a clinical trial drug that most likely will not save my life, but may save the life of somebody down the road. And I think you mentioned it earlier. Yes, there are days when I get down. There are days I cry. There are days I feel sorry for myself. But on those days, two things come to mind. One is a story, and I'll share this story with you. And hang with me on this, because the story's about rats. And everybody, like, rats? You're going to tell a story about rats? Yeah, I'm going to tell a story about rats. So back in the 1950s, there was a professor here in the United States at Johns Hopkins University that did a very simple experiment with rats. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And basically, he wanted to see how long the rats could tread water before they would sink and drown. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as the rats were getting ready to die, to go under, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he put the exact same rats back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, those rats treaded water on average for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes, that's all I can do. I'm just not going to not be successful. I'm going to die. I am going to drown. 15 minutes. Second time around, 60 hours, which said to me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. We have to believe that, maybe not today, maybe not next month, maybe even not next year, but sometime down the road, our life is going to get better based on the things that are going on in our life. And secondly, just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought that they possibly could. So whenever I get into those ugly places, I remember that story. And the other thing I do is, if you think about it, when we're down, we're depressed, we're feeling sorry for ourselves, we're looking inward, we're focused on us. And I find a pretty simple way to get out of that is to focus outward. Find somebody else who's having a bad day or, just needs a pat on the back or somebody to say hello to them or something like that. I mean, I go to the hospital every 3 weeks for treatment, so I can always find those people. But I find when I'm now focusing on helping somebody else, now I'm not thinking about me, I'm thinking about somebody else. And that kind of makes things a whole lot better.
That's so beautiful. Again, like you just turned again a bad situation into a way that you can help other people as well. And I absolutely love that. And I totally am going to use the rat story next time I'm like working out. I'm thinking this is too tough. And I'm going to think, well, if rats can do it, I should be able to do it. Otherwise, I'm worse than a rat. This is a good motivation for myself. So
this is a piece of cake. Yeah.
So I think that's a great motivation. So thank you for that. But I also want to talk about, because you've had an interesting career. So you're high school, obviously, basketball coach, but you've also been a SWAT negotiator, right? And I just feel like, obviously, all these movies come into my head. Obviously, The Negotiator, great movie. But I just think that looks like the coolest job in the world. But in reality, is it the coolest job, or is it probably the most stressful job, knowing that you've got to deal with a really high pressure situation and the one wrong word that you say could trigger them? And tell me, I want to know what it's actually like, because I'm basing this on movies, obviously.
I mean, the Samuel L. Jackson movie where, he was the negotiator and he was like a one-man Superman. He did everything. And people always ask me, is that the way it's like? It's like, no, that's not the way it works.
I'm
Sorry,
so guilty.
I hate to burst your bubble. The way it works is this: we operate as a team. So yes, there's one person that's negotiating with whoever we're negotiating with, but there's also another negotiator sitting right next to that person, listening to everything that's going on. And then there's maybe 2 or 3 or 4 other negotiators that are doing what I call work in the crowd. Why are we here? Maybe it's a gentleman who's barricaded himself or something like that. And, they talk to his mother, or they talk to a neighbor, or they talk, why are we here? Tell me about him and stuff like that. And if you're negotiating, you may get a note from the person sitting right next to you that says, don't talk about his mother, because maybe he had a fight with his mother and that's what triggered all this to start with. So you may get a note that says, don't talk about his mother. Now, that's in a perfect world. A lot of times we don't know why we're there. We don't know why this individual has done what we've done. And I think you mentioned it just a minute ago. Are you going to say something that's going to trigger him? Now, I guess to sort of step back, people always say, especially if somebody's suicidal, they're like, well, I don't want to say anything to them because I might put the thought of killing themselves into their mind. That's a fallacy. That's wrong. That's absolutely not the case. If somebody is going to kill themselves, or wants to, or is thinking about it, and you notice that, say something. Say something because we did. We would say to the person, hey, are you looking to harm yourself? Are you going to shoot yourself? We would come right out and put it right in their face, because if they're going to do that, you may have opened the door for them to help them. It's like, oh my God, somebody cares. Yes, I'll unload on you. And if they're not going to do it, they're going to look at you and say something like, no, you idiot. I'm not. What are you talking about? You're a moron. Believe me. And I've said, so sometimes as negotiators, you have to go down a rabbit hole. You have to, I don't know, let's pick a rabbit hole and figure it out. And if you're wrong, they're going to let you know. They're going to yell at you or scream at you or tell you you're an idiot or something like that. And then you kind of got to regroup and you've got to ask another question to try to figure things out. And there were several times where I'd be negotiating with somebody. I'd be talking about something over here for like 2 hours when the real problem was over here and we hadn't even gotten to that yet. So it's a matter of time. And that's why it becomes exhausting, because what we would do is we would let the person talk. Let me explain it this way. This is probably easier. We've all been to the park, or to our friend's house and played on a teeter-totter or a seesaw, when we were growing up. Think about this. The bad guy, when we first start negotiating with them, their emotional side is way up in the air and their rational side, their rational brain is way down on the ground. And over time, by talking, getting them to talk, they burn off a lot of that emotional energy so that the teeter-totter can come to equilibrium. And then hopefully over more time, their rational side will be up in the air and their emotional side will be down on the ground. When you're emotional, you don't make good decisions for yourself. When you're rational, you make much better decisions. So, starting out a negotiation with somebody who's, all amped up, or maybe they're a high or whatever it's like, and saying, hey, put the gun down and come out. That's not the time to say that. You're not going to be productive doing that. So we would ask them questions, get them to talk. And then the other problem we had, and the reason it was so exhausting, and you mentioned that a minute ago, is because we would parrot back to them what they had said to us, but then we would attach an emotion to it. And you had to get the emotion right. So if somebody's just livid and they're, yelling and screaming and stuff like that, and you say something like, blah, 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 I heard you say this, you seem to be a little upset. Well, you totally missed the emotion. They're pissed as hell, is really what they are. And if you don't get that emotion right, then you're not building that trust. And that's why it's exhausting, because you got to get down in the mud with them. You got to get down in the weeds and really kind of connect and build that trust. Because if you can build that trust, then you can potentially get that person to come out safely.
It's so crazy thinking about how many elements there are to what you do, right? It's like, it's not just about words. Like you said, it's the research your team are doing to find out the trigger points. And I love the point about, talking and getting the emotion out of it, because that's a lot like therapy, right? That's what therapists do.
That's exactly what it is.
But that's why I feel like when you're talking to me, I'm like, basically you're doing therapy, some kind of therapy in a way, that you're, when you're talking to them, and you said by talking through these emotions, they become a lot more rational. And I guess that's why when people do have these negative thoughts, it is always so important to vocalize them to other people, because the more you talk about them, and like you said, just hearing someone else repeat it back to you, like maybe it also makes you hear it in a different light and think, is that what I just said? That's kind of crazy or something. You might even hear it in a different light, right? And make you think about things in a different way. So I find that incredible. And another thing I thought was interesting when you said it was about the fallacy and the myth of telling someone with suicidal thoughts and bringing it up, because I made a post on Instagram a few months ago, very risque post, and parts of me have elements of deep regret about it. But as you said, people don't think rationally when they're emotional. And I just had a friend, unfortunately, take their own life. And they're not the first person I know to have done it. And it's quite hard. And, you know, it's also interesting if you know multiple people have done it, because then you start to think, you know, am I a common denominator here? Could I have done something to stop them? Like, am I just an awful friend or an awful person that I couldn't see the signs, or I did see the signs and I ignored them or didn't do enough? And, you know, you naturally blame yourself for a lot of these things. And I wrote a post, which was it was supposed to shock, and just I wanted people who felt these emotions to basically reach out to people. And I was doing some pro bono work for another mental health charity at the time around the same sort of suicide prevention thing. And the initial word said, suicide is easy. It's obviously a very risky thing to say. But what I then followed it up with is that, you know, to people who, I said, there are lots of people out there who are thinking about it. And if you know someone with those negative thoughts, please do reach out to them and show that you're there for them, and you could be there for them and talk to them no matter what it is, because a lot of people can be helped. A lot of people want to be helped is the main thing. They actually really, really want to be helped. But if they feel that there's no help from anywhere, then, you know, it takes a quick decision and then it's over. And that's what I meant by that. I said, you know, the actual act is quick and sudden, and it's scary to think, oh, they're 1 minute and they're not there the next. But I got a lot of obviously negativity for that, and obviously it was probably a bit. It wasn't wrong intention, and people knew that. But a lot of people said, I think there's a lot of people on Instagram, which is very bizarre, who are in it to kind of seek this sort of attention. But I got a lot of people commenting saying, your post is making me want to top myself. And I was like, wow. I said, well, I hope that isn't the case, because obviously if you read the message, and I recommend several charities who are doing this sort of thing. And so many were just saying, oh, thank you, it's easy, I'm going to go do it now. And there were lots of people who said stuff like that. And I got really worried, and part of me wanted to take it down. And then I spoke to another charity and said, no, leave it up. The sentiment's quite nice. And someone else said the same thing, that if someone is thinking about it, something like that's not going to push them over the edge or trigger them at all. And they were like, those people are trolls. And actually, when you look at their accounts, they are like that. And I don't really understand the premise behind it, to be honest, why they're going around putting these posts on people's things. But it's quite interesting to hear that, because, you know, I guess, you know, those negative emotions, I mean, like, you know, you think bringing them up may trigger it, but actually from what I've heard, everything's the opposite. They actually want to talk about it, and they actually almost want to be talked out of it, and they kind of want to. And so it's really interesting to hear you say that. And I'd love to obviously hear again, you know, how that kind of works, and what sort of people you've been called to the scene of, and, you know, why they're in that sort of situation. Why do they need a hostage negotiator and all that kind of stuff? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. I mean, we had a psychologist that would work with us when we trained. We trained every month as a team. You know, we would just run through different scenarios. We'd make stuff up, and, you know, okay, did you think about this? Or maybe this person's exhibiting this behavior or that mental illness. I mean, we were not experts at mental illness, but we were also the person, you know, like on the other side of this wall is a guy with a gun. You know, and like most psychologists are like, oh, heck no, I'm not doing that. You know, I mean, you're the cop, you go do it. But we were very well trained. And I'll say this to kind of follow up on what you said. About 90% of the time, we were successful in making this come to a peaceful resolution, where the person came out, the hostages came out, whatever it was, and nobody got hurt. Where 10% of the time, the person ended up taking their own life. And I don't want you or your audience to think that I'm callous, but I never lost any sleep over that. And the reason I didn't was because the bottom line, at the end of the day, it's their decision how this ends. It's not my decision. I'm doing everything I can to try to get you out safely so that, your mother can hug you or your wife or kids can love you or whatever it ends up being. But at the end of the day, it's your decision on how this is going to end. And like I said, 10% of the time, the person ended up killing himself. Yeah, tragic, absolutely. But it was their decision to do that. And if you think about what you're asking us to do as negotiators, whatever it is, whether literally it is somebody had a fight with their mother, or I'll give you 2 stories here in a minute, but something that we were called in to deal with may have been festering for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And on this particular day, at this particular time, it all came to a head. And now the police are here, and now I'm trying to deal with it. I don't have the benefit of those 40 years or those 10 years to try to understand where you're coming from. I've got to try to figure that out in a couple hours or 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever it is. So we did the best we could with what we had, but it was not something that, it was always tragic when somebody ended their life. And like I said, we focused on the 90% that, hey, we got them out successfully in that. So, and people always say, hey, you talked that person out. Great job. What we really did is listen the person out. We listened to what they were saying, and we parroted it back to them, and we attached that emotion. So let me give you 2 stories. One's kind of funny, one's kind of tragic. The funny one is, I happened to be working that. We were not a full-time SWAT team. And this was a while ago. We carried pagers. And so when the pager went off, we went to the scene of where whatever was happening. And I get there, I was working that night. So I was in a marked car. I get there and I'm talking to the officers at the scene. I'm like, what's the deal? He's drunk. He's barricaded himself in his house with his wife and a gun. Like, okay, do you have him on the phone? Like, yeah, we have him on the phone. So I start talking to him. And as I said earlier, the first 2-3 hours, you don't talk to the person about coming out. You don't, their emotions are too raw. You need to get that teeter-totter to equilibrium. But I was talking to this guy, and after about 10 minutes, I thought, I'm going to throw the book out here. I'm going to take a chance. I said to him, what would it take for you to come out? And there was like silence on the other end of the phone. And then he says to me, give me a beer. Seriously, honestly. I said, if I gave you a beer, do I have your word that you would let your wife go, you would put the gun down, and you would come out? He said, do I have your word I could drink it? I said, you have my word, you can drink it. He said, then I'll let my wife go. So I gave some money to one of the officers. I said, go down to the store, buy a beer. The tactical team put the beer on the front porch. I called them back and I said, hey, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it until your wife comes out, you put the gun down, and you come out with your hands up. He's like, do I still have your word I can drink it? I said, you have my word. All of a sudden, the front door flies open. Here comes his wife. Here he comes with his hands up. We handcuff him, let him drink his beer, and off to jail he goes. So
did his wife just not let him drink beer or something? Is that what the problem?
I don't know what I think they had a fight. I mean, he was obviously severely intoxicated, and they must have had a fight. And he was like, the heck with you. I'm barricading myself. I've got a gun now. I'm going to shoot you. It was all that. He was drunk. I mean, that was. And
all he wanted was a beer.
All I wanted was a beer.
Did you guys not just think this is the weirdest negotiation I've had to do? Like, okay. Yeah. Any particular?
They were not all like that. That was way out in left field. That was not usually the way they went. But that was another thing. So we never gave anybody anything without getting something in return. So it was like, people would say, give me a pack of cigarettes. It's like, well, what are you going to give me? Mm-hmm. Sometimes, give me a cigarette, give me a bullet, so there was always, I've got to be able to trust you. I gave you this cigarette. You've got to be able, or, you've got to be able to trust me. I gave you this cigarette. I've got to be able to trust you that you did, you gave me the bullet, or you gave me a magazine out of your gun, or you gave me one of the hostages, or whatever it is. So we never did that. Now, the second story is a little bit more tragic, but it's still kind of funny. So this gentleman wanted to commit suicide. So he slit his wrists initially, and that didn't work. And for some reason, he thought it would be a good idea to turn the gas on his oven and stick his head in the oven, like that was somehow going to kill him. And it didn't. So he ends up calling a family member and says, I want to kill myself and I've got a gun now. And the family member was smart enough to call the police, and we get there and surround the house, and I'm talking to him. And I mean, this thing probably started at 9:00 at night. It's now 4:00 in the morning. And so I'm talking to him and I said, what can we do to resolve this? He said, I'm really tired. I'd like to come out. I'm like, great. I said, if you come out, I said, I'll come down to the scene and we can talk face to face, because we were talking over a phone. And he's like, I'd like that. I said, okay, put the gun down and come out. And then when you come outside, do what the tactical teams, the other officers tell you to do. I said, they're going to handcuff you. I said, but do what they ask you to do and I'll come down and we'll talk some more. Oh, great. I'd like that. I said, but don't hang the phone up. Bring the phone with you. So he hangs the phone up, which we don't think a lot of because we're conditioned to do that. When a call is over, we hang up the phone, whether it's a cell phone or a regular phone. And then all of a sudden, probably 15, 20 seconds later, one of the tactical officers comes on the radio and says, we heard a gunshot. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. You shot yourself. He did, shot himself in the head. But he shot himself at such an angle that the bullet went in right underneath his temple, right underneath the skin on his temple, went around his skull and came out the other side. Never penetrated. I know.
The physics of that is bizarre. Like, how did that happen?
It was the angle that he shot that he pulled the trigger. So the bullet didn't go in. It went around and came out the other side. Now it was real bloody, and we obviously got him to the hospital and stuff like that. But the bullet never penetrated his skull. It never got to his brain. So here's a guy who wanted to kill himself 3 different times, 3 different ways. And he didn't. He wasn't successful, which kind of said to me, God was like, we don't want you here today. Sorry, you're staying there. So, but yeah, I mean, kind of tragic in a way. But the other thing that we never did to people is we never lied to them. So people would say to us, okay, I'll come out, but you got to promise me when I come out, I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, well, when you come out, you are going to go to jail. But we would deflect the conversation into something more positive. And the reason we never lied to people, it's not that we were just great people, and it's because there was a good chance a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, and this actually happened, we would be right back negotiating with that person again. And if they felt we'd lied to them,
they didn't trust you.
Exactly. Trust.
My God.
That's the whole thing. The whole overreaching part of this is trust. Absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head.
Wow.
And if they don't trust us, then you're going to have to bring another negotiator in to talk to them. And that.
But they're going to be like, oh, you worked with that guy. He lied to me last time. Why should I trust you?
Exactly.
And it's just the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy. But it does show you though. And I'm sitting here thinking about how all this like remarkably relates to business. And obviously I'm an entrepreneur and I'm thinking all these things, like it totally does. And it's about trust is the biggest thing for me. If I don't trust someone, then I don't want to do business with them. But also that, the fact that I can't believe that you'd actually be talking to that same person again a few years later. But I think the same in business. It's like, it's such a small world. And I see this, even with like recruiting and candidates and the way that they lie to you or they talk disrespectfully to you. And I'm like, well, that's very silly because, in a few years' time, our paths are going to somehow cross again. You never know. Or like, you have a client and if I had a client and I got really annoyed with them and I was really, really rude to them and I thought, screw them, I don't want their account anyway. But then that person goes to work with another company later on down the line and they remember me. They're never going to hire us again. And it's just very narrow-minded to lie or be rude to someone. That's why I think honesty is pretty much always the best policy. But you're right, you don't have to be the cold hard truth, like saying, yeah, sorry, you're going to be in jail, you're going to rot in there for the rest of your life. So, there's no point coming out anyway, because that's where you're going to straight go, because they're not going to come out if they do that. So you're right, you don't have to lie to them, but you can just, be selective with what you do tell them and still be honest, because if you never lie to them, at least there's that sort of element of trust there, but you can reframe the conversation to highlight the positive stuff. So
You can. And let me give you one more thing on that. One of the things I learned, well, two things that I learned as a negotiator was, one, the importance of listening to understand versus listening to respond. I mean, we're all great, about, hurry up, Sabrina, say what you're going to say because I want to get my 2 cents in. That's listening to respond, as opposed to, oh, Sabrina, I understand what you're saying. I may agree with you. I may not agree with you, but help me to understand where you're coming from. Now, all of a sudden, we're developing a relationship. We're developing trust. We're connecting as human beings, not just, I want to sell you something. And if you think about it in business, the best salespeople are not the best talkers. They're the best listeners. You as the client, oh, I heard you say this. Here's how our product can help you with that. Here's how our product can help you with that. And the other thing that I learned as a negotiator, and this is incredibly hard for just human beings to do, is the importance of using silence to your benefit. So a lot of times, like I said, we'd ask somebody an open-ended question and they'd talk for a while and then they'd stop talking. Well, we don't like that as a human being. We want to fill that void of silence. But you had to just shut up and not say anything.
Because they'll tell you more and they keep talking.
They'll start talking.
Yeah. And
if you can use that in business as well, let people talk and then they stop talking and you don't say anything. You just sit there. They'll start talking again and they'll give you more information.
That's an amazing coaching thing that people talk about as well. Like, I know that's a coaching technique. And I read a book recently about it where, talking to, for example, staff members, and if you do it in a more coaching way, then you get more out of them. So that's exactly it. It's the listening thing. So you ask them a question, a very open-ended question, and most of the time they'll just give you, a couple of sentence answer. But then, like you said, humans, then we're like, oh, this is awkward. I need to fill it with something. So next question. But then if you just sit there and just go, and you wait for them to keep, they'll say more and they'll say more. And eventually the real answers come out, right? And the real view to their problems. And you actually then start to find out issues that they may have, they've never really wanted to say. So it totally does relate to business. And I think it's incredible how much correlation there is between business and a SWAT negotiation team. But you guys have some remarkable skills. But it also reminds me of a book. Have you ever heard of the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss?
No.
You've got to check it out because it's one of my favorite books ever, well, business books for sure. Chris Voss was an FBI.
Oh, yes, I have. I'm sorry. Yes, I have. Yes.
Yeah. So this guy, and I think he's also done like a masterclass, the masterclass series. He's also done one of those. And I need to watch that actually, because I think, but I read that book and I was fascinated because, again, I like the way that, just like how you filled it with stories and they're relatable and they're exciting and, but they were connected. And his whole premise of the book is that with a never split the difference thing, it's that, say if, we're doing business and I'm saying, oh, my fee's 10 grand. And you're like, oh, actually I could do 5. And then I was like, oh, okay, so how about we meet in the middle and say 7.5? He's like, no, don't do that. You don't do that. And he's like, you stick to your thing. And there's all these different stories about obviously client relationships, getting promotions at jobs and raises and all that kind of stuff. And it's about how you should never split the difference. And he talks about the negotiation techniques that he would use in his job to be able to get what he wants in business. So that's what I'm thinking of when you're telling me these stories.
It's funny because I was on a podcast with a gentleman who had interviewed him on his podcast, Chris Voss. Wow. And then he wanted to have me on because Chris is an FBI, so he's a federal agent. And actually, our police department, our negotiating team had trained with the FBI's hostage negotiating team as well. So we got some great training, great information from them. But then he wanted to have me on as like, okay, how do you do this, on an everyday thing where you're going after a homicide suspect, or like I said, some guy barricades himself in his house, because he's drunk and stuff like that. I mean, the FBI is not going to deal with that. They deal with, the big stuff, the high level stuff, the federal crimes and stuff like that. But it was a lot of the same things that we talked about apply to business, apply to, negotiating on a federal level, negotiating, on a local level. So the deal is, I mean, we're all connected as human beings. And that's where, that's why it's not that much different, because whether you're a salesperson in business or whether I'm a police officer negotiating with somebody who's taken a hostage, it's still a relationship. Mm-hmm. It's still a relationship based on trust, mm-hmm. based on listening, based on trying to get the best out of whatever, whether I get the sale for you or whether I get this person out safely. It's a connection between human beings. And if you reduce it to that, it makes a lot more sense, other than, oh man, you were a negotiator. That's cool. Yeah, most people don't live next to a hostage negotiator and stuff like that, but it's still it's a relationship between a husband and a wife, between mm-hmm. a parent and a child, between a boss and a subordinate. It's the same. It's relationships. And if we can multiply and cultivate those relationships, we're going to be successful in life.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's what I think when I'm kind of doing my stuff in business, because I don't think I'm very good at sales. I think that sales is a bit of a dirty word. It's like cringe and, it doesn't suit me, but I just listen, like you're saying, if you have someone come to you and they're saying, these are my issues. These are the problems we're having. And I'm like, okay, well, what about this? We could do this to help you. We could do this to help you. And it's just a conversation and just ideas. If I'm listening to their pain points and offering them solutions, they're like, great, that's exactly what we need, and that's it. I'll just listen to what they need and be able to help. And then they want to work with us. It's as simple as that. There's no sales in it, really. It's just, how can we help you? Which I love and I stand by. And I think it is all about that relationship, and they trust us, because then I will show them how it's done and I can prove to them how it's done. And then after that, it's then maybe that's a contractual thing afterwards, but it's really about how can we help you and how can I prove that, we're trustworthy. And I think every relationship is based on that. So I totally agree with that. But I've got to ask, have you used your negotiation skills like in personal life to your advantage? Because I feel like there's some sneaky skills you've got there. And I was like, I bet you've manipulated your family into getting what you want with your skills.
I won't answer that other than to say, what do you think?
Oh dear. But they must know. They must I feel like if I was suddenly like giving in or, and I was like, hang on a minute, Terry's at it again. Is he playing mind games? What's he done? He somehow managed to persuade me to something I don't want to do.
But if you think about it, when I was operating as a negotiator, it wasn't emotional for me. I was trying to help another person. I mean, if your kids are doing something wrong, it's emotional. You get mad, and and so now all of a sudden you bring another dynamic into it. Regardless of how good your skills are, you're pissed off right now, and it's like, oh shoot, I probably should have used some of my negotiating techniques, but I was mad as a dad, or something like that. So you try to remain neutral, kind of like Switzerland. I'm neutral in this negotiation. I want to help you. I want to do what I'm trained to do. But with your kids or your family or your friends, the emotion part of it, now all of a sudden that's a much bigger piece, and it's harder to use your negotiating skills in that regard. You have to try to take the emotion out of it.
But how do you do that? Because I feel like that's a really good thing as well when it comes to business. So I know that I definitely still get emotional with certain things. Like you get an email come through and you're really pissed off and you like kind of reply to it. I feel like I'm trying to sort of, that if I do get an email that comes through or something and it annoys me so much, I'm trying now to say, I'm gonna wait for 24 hours, park it and come back to it and not let an emotional response to it. Because when I look back at it, I'm like, oh, wouldn't have written that, Right. How do you, because I mean, like you said, emotions they're dangerous things, really. They really do cloud your judgment. Like you were saying, the seesaw thing's a great analogy, right? So when you're emotional, like you're rational, you're not very rational. So how do you balance that emotion? You're saying, obviously dealing with your kids and it's different, but I guess in a business situation, everyone's going to have emotions. So you're going to have natural reactions. But how did you sort of remove the emotions? Because there must have been times in your job, I know that you don't know the person, but there must have been times where someone said something really awful. You're like, oh, this guy's scum. He sounded like a complete jerk. So you're like, oh, why am I wasting my time and energy on this guy? Like you probably had a couple of situations like this. You're talking down a serial killer or something. You're like, But you have to take those emotions out in order to do your job properly. Like, how do you handle that sort of thing? How do you kind of suppress your emotions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happened not just with police officers that are negotiators, but police officers in general. I mean, you'd be taken off the air if I told you all the names I've been called, as a police officer. But again, it's kind of like, I mean, think about social media and all the people that go on social media and say, hey, Sabrina, your hair is ugly, or I don't like that dress you're wearing, or I don't know, I'm just being, your hair's fine. But they say that, and it's like, that only hurts. That only resonates if you accept that. If you say, oh, I really care that that person doesn't like my hair or doesn't like what I'm wearing. Why would you care? I mean, if some idiot is telling you, that, why would you care? So, and I think what I try to do is ask this one question. Why? Why am I upset? What is that email saying that is making me upset? Why am I upset about it? And then try to figure out a way to craft a response to it where I can win and you can win. I mean, everybody wants to save face. Everybody wants to have a win-win situation. That's not always possible. I get that. But at the same time, try to understand why you're mad. Why is that emotion being elicited by what this email says to you, or by what that person says on social media, or whatever? It's like, why, and for me on social media, and especially for younger people, why do you care? Why do you care if that person says, I didn't like what you wore today, or you're ugly, or you're not smart, or you're stupid? You don't know me. You don't, I mean, just because you don't like, what made you the boss of me? I mean, you hear kids say that all the time. You're not the boss of me. It's like, why do you care? So ask yourself why you feel the way you do, why that whatever happened elicited that emotion, and then kind of backtrack from that. Okay, well, why am I upset with that? Well, maybe I'm not going to get the account. Well, what would be the worst thing that could happen with that? Well, maybe I'm not going to get my bonus from that. Okay. Am I still going to be able to feed my family and pay the rent and, the car? Yeah, I still am. Okay. So in the scheme of things, if you break things down into their simplest form, it's kind of the old joke, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, and again, kind of in business, I want to be better at sales. Well, oh my God, that's a huge goal to have. What if you said, I want to get 1% better at sales every day? At the end of 30 days, I'm 30% better at sales. At the end of a quarter, I'm almost 100% better at sales than I was when I started. Now, 1% better every day is a whole lot more manageable and able to, something that you can wrap your hands around, as opposed to, I want to get better at sales. Oh my gosh, that's too broad. Again, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time.
I love it. It's like the whole incremental change. And I don't know if I'm just going to quote another book that I thought was great, is the Atomic Habits one by James Clear. It's the same sort of principle, right? And it's like that little tiny baby steps at a time. And you'll start to see, like you said, the 1% thing is something that people don't realize. And, it's after a certain amount of time, you do something every day for a year, how much better are you at what you're doing if you're just doing like 1% every time? And it's kind of crazy.
But think about that. I mean, I don't know if you have the same, nursery rhymes and things like that, but there's the old story about the tortoise and the hare. They start on a race and and the hare's boom, I'm gone. I'm fast. I want it now. I want it immediately. And the tortoise just methodically takes
slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. And that's what, I got to do this and I got to do this now. Again, why? Do you really need to do it now, or do you want to do it now?
I do think there's a distinct difference. And I was going to ask you, because it sounds like a lot of this stuff might be in your book. So how much of that, because it's about sustainable excellence, that's obviously what it is. So how much of this stuff is in your book? What are we learning from it?
Yeah, some of it is. I mean, and people always ask me, it's like, you wrote this book, Sustainable Excellence. Well, what is excellence? And my response is always, I don't know. Like, wait a minute, you idiot, you wrote this book. What do you mean you don't know what excellence is? And I talk about that in the introduction to the book, that, you and I may look at, I don't know, we may watch a movie and, you say, oh my God, that's the best movie I've ever seen in my life. And I may say, yeah, it was good, but I didn't think it was that great. We watch a sports team, that's the greatest sports team that I've ever seen play. Yeah, they were good, but I don't think, and I think that's what excellence is about. Excellence is kind of like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. Where you would look at something and say that person or that group is excellent, I may say, yeah, they're good, but I don't think they're excellent. So beauty is sort of like excellence in the eye of the beholder. And then sustainable. Once you get excellence, how do you sustain it? And if you think about all the people that work their butts off as entrepreneurs or even, in the C-suites of companies that, look, I've taken this company and now all of a sudden we've reached the pinnacle. We're at the top of the mountain. And what do people usually do? They kind of kick back, put their feet up on the desk, pour themselves a cold one and be like, yeah, I've arrived. And then what happens? 6 months later, a year later, somebody surpasses them. Somebody, goes above and beyond, because people are smart. They're going to figure out how you did what you did, and then they're going to improve upon that. Mm-hmm. If you want to sustain excellence, that's what you've got to do. You've got to change. You've got to grow. You've got to modify. You've got to find ways to get better. You can't just sit there and say, well, I've made it to the top. I'm always going to be at the top. You're not. People are going to pass you up.
And it's not just people, it's like big organizations and now and like technology and everything. And that's the same thing you've just stated. The story of like so many failing businesses who were the pioneers in their industry, and they just kind of stayed put, right? And all these other people, like I said, people are going to see success and be like, right, I want a bit of that, but I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it better. And then it's just that growing thing. And obviously, if you've got a couple of players in an industry, that's when you get fantastic progress in that particular industry because they're competing with each other. But then if you have someone who's only just one person is kind of striving for excellence and the other people aren't kind of catching them up, that's how things stagnate, right? And you just kind of not really kind of push yourselves, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah. And my company's called Motivational Check-In, and motivation's great, but motivation is something that comes from you. I mean, I can't motivate you. I can give you things, I can make suggestions, I can do things, but the motivation has to come from you. The way you sustain that motivation is with good habits. You put habits in place that are not destructive. You don't smoke, you don't abuse alcohol, you don't eat fatty foods, you exercise, you meditate, you journal, you do whatever. Well, I mean, you've got a choice. You can pick which one you want to do, but you've got to put in the good habits to sustain the motivation that you have. And then all of a sudden, now I want to get up in the morning and I want to go do this because it's fun and I'm seeing some success and I feel better and I'm growing and things like that. So yeah, think about all the people that, they do the same thing every day. They get up at the same time, they brush their teeth, they take a shower, they eat breakfast, they get dressed, they go to work, the same route. They do the same thing at work. They come home the same route. They eat dinner. They sit in front of the television and they go to bed. That's their life. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'd blow my brains out if that was my life. I would. I would be like, but we get comfortable and you don't grow when you're comfortable, and I always recommend to people, and I try to do this every day of my life. Do one thing every day that makes you nervous, that scares you, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you do those small things every single day, when the big things in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we get let go from our job, we find out we have some kind of a chronic or a terminal illness, you'll be so much more resilient to handle those things when they present themselves. But we don't like things that make us uncomfortable. The problem is that's the only way you're going to grow.
And you just reminded me of that Baz Luhrmann song. I don't know if you remember the song that must have been 20 odd years ago. But Baz Luhrmann's Sunscreen, and he said, "Do one thing every day that scares you." That's one of the lyrics in the song, and it just reminded you of that. And I think I think every day is obviously quite a commitment, and that's obviously how you make habits, right? Good habits, like you said, if instead you exercise and not eat fatty foods and all that kind of stuff, and it does take time before it becomes habitual. But one thing every day that scares you is quite a lot. But it doesn't mean you have to go bungee jumping or something extreme. It could just be sending someone you don't know a message, that's kind of a bit scary, right? And, reaching out to someone, because everyone hates rejection, fear of rejection. So it's like, you don't want to send someone a message in case they don't reply or they say no. And so that's a bit scary. So that would count, I'd say. So what would be your typical things that you would do on a day-to-day basis that kind of pushes you and challenges you?
Get up an hour early. The other day, I hate going to the dentist. The other day I picked up the phone and made my 6-month appointment to go to the dentist. Oh, that's no big deal. Well, it is when you hate the dentist. Do things like that. I have an amputated leg. Walking with my prosthetic leg is hard. It's difficult. It's a pain in the butt, to be perfectly honest with you. But on those days when I don't feel like doing it, do something like that. There's a million things you could do. Like you said, pick up the phone and call somebody that, hey, I really thought this guy was interesting. I'd like to talk to him. You want to have lunch? You want to have a cup of coffee? I was pick people that you admire and say, in your company or something like that. Hey, I know you don't know me. We don't work in the same field, but call them. Hey, can we have a cup of coffee? Could I take you to lunch or something like that? Well, what if they say no? What if they do? They say no, you go find somebody else tomorrow to have lunch with. Those are uncomfortable things. But if you do those uncomfortable things, you'll be so much more resilient in your life when the big things, the things that scare us, the things that we don't want to happen, that we know are going to happen. When those things happen, you'll be much more resilient to handle it, and they won't destroy you. So many people get destroyed because they're like, oh my God, I can't handle this. I promise you. And everybody has a breaking point. Everybody has a point where they can't go on. But I promise I know this for a fact. That breaking point is so much further down the road than you ever thought it would be. We have a group of sailors, people in the military. They're called the Navy SEALs. You may or may not have heard of them. They're kind of like the SAS of the, of Great Britain, of the UK. And these guys have what they call their 40% rule. And basically, these are some of the toughest people in the world. And what they say is, if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, if you can't go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So the next time you don't think you can get off the couch and go to the gym, the next time you don't think you can stay late at the office and finish that report, the next time you whatever, and you don't want to do it, remember, you have 60% left in reserve to give to yourself.
I can't even believe that, thinking about it. Like, I guess everyone's different where their breaking point is, like you said, but 40%. And I definitely know about the Navy SEALs. I mean, I have listened to some amazing podcasts with some ex-Navy SEALs because, boy, are they inspirational. And some of the most mentally tough people I've ever come across, like hearing their stories, and again, just so inspiring from a leadership perspective as well. Like the things that it's incredible listening to it. So I'm well aware of Navy SEALs, and obviously there's a lot in Hollywood movies as well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, but again, people don't see. I see them as, like, as you said, like mentally incredible people, but 40%, and the things that they have to go through. The things that they have to do, I just can't even fathom, like, being in a situation like that. And they find the strength to continue and not just continue for themselves. They help their comrades, and they all get through it together, and somehow they manage to survive these things. And it's just, it's remarkable. And it does show, like you said, right at the very beginning, I think you were saying about how your body is way stronger than you think it is. And I think that's also to do with the fact that a lot of it's all in the mind. So your body strength could be stronger than it is, but your mind's making it weaker because your mind's telling you these negative things. And like you said, it's all about mindset. So if you strengthen your mind, you can strengthen your body at the same time.
You're right. There was a basketball coach here in the United States when I was growing up at Indiana University, probably one of the most successful college coaches. And he used to have a saying that went like this: mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. So here's this great coach teaching premier athletes to use their bodies to be great basketball players. But what he was really saying with that quote is that your mind or your mindset is 4 times more important than anything your physical body is going to do.
And I can even imagine that. Imagine, because again, I think about this in basketball, like with the shot clock and people taking that shot right before it. And I'm like, how are you able to do this? The mindset and the confidence that you can grab that ball and be like, I'm going to make the shot. And you take it and you're like, I'm going to take it. Whereas if you don't have that mindset, you're going to look for the pass. And that pass could be intercepted. You might waste another second. You might miss a shot clock. But if you just have the confidence to go for it, that's the difference between a win or a loss. And it's kind of crazy how there's such big stakes in a couple of seconds, or that mindset shift. And it's empowering, basically.
It is.
I love it. I've so enjoyed our conversation today. I think it's been incredible. I think your stories have been motivating. You've been inspiring, and your journey of everything that's happened. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people who want to have a chat with you and find out more information. So what's the best way that people can get in touch with you?
So I have a blog. Every day I put up a thought for the day. And with that thought comes a question about maybe how you could apply that thought in your life. I have recommendations on my blog for books, for videos to watch. My LinkedIn or my social media accounts are on there as well. It's called motivationalcheck.com. Also, I've just started a membership. It's sustainableexcellencemembership.com. If you go to sustainableexcellencemembership.com, you can download a free copy of my book on there. So if you want to check out the book, you can also get the book on Amazon and pretty much anywhere you can get a book online. You can get Sustainable Excellence.
Perfect. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes because I'm sure that loads of people want to check it out. But it's been amazing having you here today, Terry. And thank you so much for sharing all the stories.
Well, thanks for having me on, Sabrina. I always say it's nice people like you that allow me to come on and have a conversation with you. And hopefully between that conversation, if we make a difference in somebody's life, today's been a good day.
I love it. I've got the same sort of mentality, so I absolutely love it. And thank you, everyone who's been listening today. And I'll see you guys next week for another episode of No Bullshit Talks.